control. I'm seeing movement under the canopy, but the trees aren't moving. My name is Stephen Carter. I was born in Staunton, Virginia, and for the better part of 20 years, I served as a ranger in Shenandoah National Park. I've walked these trails through every season, snow breaking branches in the winter, wildflowers carpeting the meadows in spring, the thick green canopy that shuts out the sun in summer, and the fire-colored leaves in autumn. I thought I knew every inch of this land, every sound it made. But there are things living here that I was never prepared to face. The story I'm about to tell you isn't one you'll find in any ranger's manual. It isn't in the maps we hand out at the visitor centers, and it isn't in the cheerful brochures about black bear safety or avoiding ticks. What I stumbled on, what I uncovered, it's the reason I can't walk the trails the same way anymore. It's the reason I've left the service. They told us in training, never dig. Don't disturb what's under the soil. Keep to the surface. That's the rule no one writes down, but every veteran ranger passes along. At first, I thought it was just about preserving history, respecting burial mounds, unmarked graves, old sites left to time. But now I know the truth. That rule was there for survival. It started with a routine patrol, late July, heavy air pressing down, the cicadas crying so loud it felt like the trees were screaming. I was a few miles off trail, near an old fire road that had grown over, the kind of place where the canopy is so dense, the light feels like dusk even at noon. I remember stopping because the ground shifted under me, just a tremor, like the earth exhaling. At first I thought it was a small sinkhole, or maybe the roots shifting with the summer rain. But then I heard it, a hollow knock from beneath my boots, like I was standing over something hollowed out. Curiosity got the better of me. I pushed back the leaf litter, pulled at the softened dirt. Within minutes, I had scraped enough away to reveal an opening, too straight, too deliberate to be natural. It looked like the top of a shaft, reinforced with wood that had long since rotted black. And then the smell hit me. Not the sweet rot of the forest floor, something older, the kind of smell that makes your throat close before you even name it. I should have covered it back up. I should have walked away. But I didn't. I went back the next day, against protocol, carried a flashlight, rope, and my radio. I told myself it was just an old mine shaft, nothing unusual in these mountains. But part of me knew better. The opening was bigger now, like the earth itself wanted me to see what was beneath. I lowered myself down a few feet at a time. The shaft opened into a cavern maybe 20 feet below, walls etched with markings that didn't belong to miners or loggers. Concentric circles carved deep into the stone, repeating over and over, lit only by my flickering beam. That was when the whispers began. At first, I thought it was wind funneling through cracks in the rock. But the words had form. They said names I didn't recognize, whispered in a tongue I couldn't place, though it echoed in a way that made the hairs on my neck rise. I tried the radio. Static. Then, faintly, my own voice echoed back. Not the words I'd just spoken. Something older, rasping, using my tone but not my language. I climbed fast, heart hammering. By the time I reached the surface, it was dusk. For days, I tried to shake it off. Told myself it was stress, lack of sleep. Rangers see strange things. Lights, shadows, lost hikers turning up where they shouldn't. But then I found the tool. It was half buried near the opening, an old pickaxe, rusted through, wood splintered with age. I pulled it free, and tangled in its shaft was a fragment of bone. Too small for a deer, not quite human. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whispers from the cavern. Every creak of the cabin sounded like footsteps beneath me. A week later, I went back. I told myself it was to seal the opening, to make sure no one else stumbled across it. But the truth? I needed to see it again. This time, the shaft looked wider. Fresh soil pushed aside, like something had climbed out. I shone my light down. The rope I'd left tied to a tree was gone, severed clean. The cavern below looked emptier, darker than before. Then, over the radio, static, and my own voice, whispering from underground. Only this time, I understood the words. They warned us never to dig. My knees went weak. I backed away, but the ground trembled again, like something shifting closer to the surface. I filed no report. What could I say? That the forest spoke back? That something climbed up from the roots? They'd have laughed me out of the service. But I started noticing changes. On patrol, animals went silent in certain groves. Deer bolted before I even saw them. The air felt thicker, heavy with something unseen. Once, I passed a group of hikers near big meadows. A little girl stared at me, then whispered, clear as day, "Don't dig." Her parents didn't hear her. When I turned back, she was still watching me, eyes wide, like she knew. The last time I went near the shaft was in September. I found prints in the mud, not boots. I left the ranger service soon after, citing health reasons. But the truth is, I couldn't keep patrolling those trails, knowing what was moving beneath them. I couldn't tell families with kids about the beauty of Shenandoah, while wondering if the earth might open up and swallow them whole. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Maybe you'll say it was exhaustion, isolation, imagination playing tricks. I'd almost agree with you, if not for one thing. Last week, I got a call from a friend still in the service. A ranger I trust with my life. He was out near the same fire road, off trail. He radioed in, voice tight with fear. "Control, I'm seeing movement under the canopy, but the trees aren't moving." And then his line went dead. Silence holds. Then my voice again, lower now, almost a whisper. What lurks beneath Shenandoah's canopy isn't mine to explain. I only know this, it isn't gone. Whatever I saw, whatever I heard, it's closer now. And if you walk these trails, if you hear knocking under your boots, don't dig. When they transferred me to Shenandoah, I thought it was a mercy assignment. That's what they called it. A quiet shift. Less paperwork, fewer visitors, a chance to let the younger rangers handle the chaos of the busier parks. I'd put in years out west, fought fires that ate through acres, searched for hikers who didn't want to be found, pulled bodies out of ravines. So when they said Shenandoah, I pictured a gentler kind of duty. Rolling hills, overlooks with families snapping photographs, a place to breathe easy. But from the first briefing, I realized Shenandoah wasn't what it seemed. The older rangers didn't hand me a map or a tour guide speech. They gave me rules. Strange ones. Rules I'd never been told anywhere else. Never patrol past dusk, one said, his eyes fixed on mine like he needed me to understand it was more than a suggestion. Doesn't matter if you're tracking someone or if you think you're lost. Stop before the light goes. You stay after dark, you don't come back the same. Another ranger added, never use a flashlight under the canopy, not unless you want something looking back at you. If you can't see, stop moving. Wait it out. And then came the last rule, spoken so low I almost thought he was joking, but no one laughed. If you hear your name whispered, he said, don't answer, don't turn, don't acknowledge it, just keep walking. I remember trying to hide the confusion on my face. I'd been in this line of work long enough to hear every kind of campfire warning, every bit of folklore meant to scare the rookies. But their eyes told me this wasn't a story to pass the time. These were instructions, survival tactics. Later that week, when I was settling into my quarters, a small cabin with walls that creaked whenever the wind pressed too hard, another ranger stopped by. He was one of the locals, born and raised not far from the park's edge. He leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed, and said, "You'll hear stories from folks around here about the Canopy. They'll tell you it hides more than shade." He paused, like he was weighing whether to go on. "It hides the things that remember." I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer, just gave a look like he'd already said too much, then turned and walked into the trees. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake those words. The things that remember. Remember what? Who? And why the rules? Why the warnings about light? About whispers? At first, I told myself it was just part of the park's culture. Every forest has its myths, and Shenandoah had been inhabited long before it became a park. The mountains were old. The soil was older. Of course there'd be stories. But the longer I stayed, it was only my second month into the assignment when the first missing hiker report came in. A man in his late 30s, experienced enough to know better than to wander off trail. His car was still parked at the overlook. His pack was gone. But he hadn't checked in for 2 nights, and that was long enough to raise the alarm. They paired me with Ranger Thompson for the search. He'd been here for years, the kind of man who didn't waste words unless he had to. When I asked if he'd been through the area before, he only said, "Not where we're headed." We set out before noon, climbing through thickets that pressed in close, moving into stretches of the park that weren't on any of the visitor maps. The deeper we went, the quieter the forest became. Not peaceful, just silent, like even the birds refused to give us away. After an hour, we came to the first of the trees. I'd seen hollows before, trunks rotted from the inside, but this was different. These weren't natural. The bark bulged around the openings, smooth like skin stretched tight. I leaned closer and froze. Inside the hollow, the wood wasn't dead. It was shifting, subtle, like the slow rhythm of breath. I stepped back, heart thudding, and asked Thompson if he saw it too. He only nodded once, grim, and muttered, "Keep walking." We pushed on, but the air grew heavier with every step. Not just humid, but weighted, like we were wading through something thicker than air. I checked my compass, and the needle spun until it was useless. That was when we heard it. Footsteps, clear, steady, following just far enough behind to stay unseen. I stopped, raised my hand for silence, and listened. There it was again, soft crunches in the leaf litter. I swung my flashlight toward the sound. The beam cut through the undergrowth, but the ground was smooth. No prints, no disturbance, just undisturbed earth staring back at us. My skin crawled. I whispered to Thompson, "You hear that?" He didn't answer right away, just stared into the canopy, jaw tight. Then he said, "Never shine your light under the trees, not unless you want to see what's looking back." The words hit me like a warning I'd already broken, and though the forest looked empty, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was closer now, watching, waiting for us to slip past another rule we barely understood. We found the campsite not long after, the missing hiker's gear laid out just as it should have been. His pack was leaned neatly against a log. A small stove sat on the ground, a pan still crusted with beans, long dried. Everything in order, like he'd stepped away for just a moment. But then we saw the sleeping bags. They weren't torn from the outside, the way an animal might claw through. They were shredded from within, fabric ripped outward in jagged strips, as if someone or something had thrashed against the inside until it gave way. The hairs rose on the back of my neck. Thompson didn't waste time. He pulled his radio, hissed something I couldn't catch, then turned to me. "We're leaving," he said, voice low, urgent. "Now." But before I could move, I heard it. My name, soft at first, like a breath drawn right against my ear. Stephen. I froze. Thompson kept walking, but I stood rooted to the ground, every instinct screaming not to turn, not to answer. The rules, they'd told me about this. Never respond if the forest calls you. And yet, it wasn't just any voice. It was my father's. He'd been gone 10 years, but I'd know the sound of him anywhere. The way he used to call me in from the yard at dusk, gentle but firm. Stephen. Against every warning, every bit of training, I whispered back, "Dad?" The forest answered. The same voice, the same tone, but wrong. Stretched thin, as if dragged through water, broken into pieces that didn't quite fit together. "Dad," the echo sang back to me, distorted, cracked, repeating until it wasn't even a word anymore, just sound, twisted into mockery. Leaves shivered above us. Not the branches, not the whole canopy, just the leaves, rattling against each other though no wind touched them. Thompson grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. His face was pale, jaw locked. "Don't answer again," he said. His eyes darted upward into the trembling green. "Whatever's here, it knows you now." And in that moment, with the forest holding its breath around us, I understood the truth. Those rules weren't superstition. They weren't folklore. They were the only thing keeping us from being pulled deeper into something that had been waiting, patient, beneath the canopy. We pressed on, though every step felt heavier than the last. Thompson kept his eyes fixed forward, refusing to speak, but I could feel the tension in his stride. He knew where we were heading, even if I didn't. The forest thinned just enough for us to see it, a hollow in the earth, tucked between a ring of oaks whose roots twisted down like grasping fingers. At first it looked like a sinkhole, the ground collapsing under centuries of rain. But when we got closer, I saw the truth. The roots weren't tangled by accident. They had been pulled apart, woven into an arch that framed the blackness below. A doorway. I should have turned back. Everything in me screamed to. But Thompson raised his body cam, clipped it on, and without a word, started down. Against every order we'd been given, against the rules themselves, I followed. My own camera blinked red, recording as we slipped beneath the canopy and into the earth. The passage narrowed, then widened, until we stood inside a cavern that seemed to stretch for miles. The air was damp, close, carrying a smell like soil mixed with rot. I raised my light, sweeping it across the walls, and froze. Faces, hundreds of them. Each wall was covered in carved wooden visages, arranged in uneven rows, staring out with hollow eyes. Some were cracked with age, their features warped and splintered, centuries old. But others looked recent. The grain still smooth, the edges sharp, as though cut only days before. And then I saw what froze the breath in my chest. The details weren't random. They weren't anonymous. They were people, real people. Faces I'd seen on the missing persons reports pinned up in the ranger station. Faces that had been in the newspapers, some from years back, some from only weeks ago. I stepped closer to one, a young woman with freckles, her expression caught between fear and pleading. Her eyes glistened. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but no, the surface was wet. I staggered back. Thompson's voice came in a whisper, sharp as a blade. "They're not carvings." I turned toward him, and his face was ashen, his flashlight trembling against the cavern wall. "They're husks." And in the silence that followed, I swear I heard them breathe. I should have turned back the moment we saw that first face in the wall. But fear and curiosity drove me deeper. My partner's flashlight shook in his grip, casting wild shadows that made the carved husks seem alive. Their eyes followed us, or maybe it was just the shine of wetness catching the beam. I don't know. I don't want to know. And then the cavern began to breathe. Not like the wind or an echo. It was voices, hundreds of them, overlapping. Some whispered, some screamed, some simply said a name. Different names, endlessly, as if they were taking roll. And then, one of those voices called mine. Before I could process it, my partner screamed. Something had his arm. No, not had. It was pulling. His whole body was being dragged backwards into the black. I swung my light toward him, and what I saw froze me where I stood. It wasn't hands clutching him. It was shadows. Long, thin, fluid shapes peeling themselves away from the rock. They didn't grip him like flesh and bone. They wrapped around him like smoke, seeping into his uniform, dragging him into the dark where the beam wouldn't reach. He shouted for help, and I didn't move. I couldn't. The body cam caught it all. His face, contorted in panic, eyes wide as those shadows pulled him farther, his boots kicking grooves into the dirt. And then, nothing. The sound of his voice cut off so suddenly, it was like the cavern swallowed it whole. And then, they turned to me. The walls shifted. The shadows peeled free in droves, stretching, bending, unfolding like paper tearing itself apart. They didn't walk. They slid. Some flattened against the walls, moving sideways, impossibly thin. Others darted across the ceiling, spilling from the roots like ink in water. My radio cracked to life, spitting static and broken words that weren't from dispatch. They were my own voice, replayed back, sentences I'd spoken hours before. I ran. I don't even remember making the choice. My legs just carried me, every step louder than the next, breath tearing at my lungs. Branches snapped overhead, not from wind, but from them. Those things moving in the trees, above the canopy. Their speed was wrong, too fast, too fluid. Every time I looked back, they weren't chasing me in one shape. They shifted, bent, sometimes upright, sometimes crawling, sometimes gliding across the dirt like shadows detached from their owners. My radio sputtered again. My partner's voice came through, ragged, pleading, but I knew he was gone. I knew. And still, some part of me wanted to stop, to turn around, to not let him vanish into that place. Behind me, the chorus of voices rose, blending into a roar of names, including mine, broken and repeated, until it sounded less like a name and more like an animal call. The last thing I remember, before the forest finally opened into a clearing, was a shape lunging from the canopy, not falling, not leaping, unfolding, like a shadow given flesh. And then, I was outside, running, alive, but I never stopped hearing the branches snap, even when the trees were far behind me. I'm sitting in my truck now, doors locked, engine running but useless, because I can't bring myself to put it in gear. My hands won't stop shaking. This recorder, it's the only way I can make sense of what just happened. Shenandoah isn't just a park. It isn't just trails and trees, and the quiet people come here to escape into. It's a feeding ground. All those warnings, the rules they drilled into me, the rules I thought were superstition, they weren't guidelines. They were survival instructions. Never patrol past dusk. Never use a flashlight under the canopy. Never answer when your name is whispered. Those weren't just strange traditions passed down from older rangers. They were the only thing standing between us and them. The canopy. It's not just shade. It's a veil, a curtain that hangs between our world and something older, something waiting. When you step under it, you don't belong to yourself anymore. They already know your name. I can still hear them. My partner's scream, cut off like a candle being snuffed. The walls, those faces, they weren't carved. They were emptied. Shells of people who walked too deep, who broke the rules. And now they know me. I wasn't supposed to survive. I wasn't supposed to leave. I can feel it in my chest, in my bones, like something's crawling just beneath my skin. If anyone finds this recording, don't go looking for me. Don't go looking for the missing. Shenandoah doesn't give people back. It takes them, reshapes them, wears them like bark. And if you've ever walked beneath the canopy, if you've ever heard your name when no one was there, then it's already too late.